We're now moving on to when a meaningful minority language policy acts as a public health and environmental policy, which will be presented to us by Larue Joyner, an independent scholar. Lauren is an independent researcher who focuses on Gaelic ethnology and folklore. She lives out in the sticks in the woods of Franklin County. North Carolina, anyways, in the USA. And she has a BSc with honors in psychology, which she got in 2016 from Western Carolina University. And her interests are folklore and psychology and how these things kind of interact.
Yes.
Great.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm very honored to be here today. I'm an artist like Malcolm here. I was an artist first, and then I became a scientist, and then I became a programmer, and then I became a Gaelic activist. I am part of the Scottish Gaelic diaspora. I'm a diasporic learner. Otherwise, I would be presenting in Gaelic to you today. I'm here to talk to you today about it can be heavy, but I think it's very important to discuss in regards to how we approach most things. So I'll go on to the next slide here. I am a millennial, so I grew up on the internet, and I learn a lot through just talking to people and also seeing what people have to say. And when I saw this tweet earlier this year, I was like, yeah, that's the whole thing right there for me. They're not discrete things. They're all the same things: language, land, people, traditions. They have to all be protected at once. It's like an equilibrium. They feed into each other. There's another tweet that really, really made me think. And I saw a lot of people who are not familiar with the Native communities in North America or Indigenous communities around the world. That's something that a lot of Westerners and Anglophones don't think about, is that, a lot of these communities and cultures are living in a post-apocalyptic world. So I found this great research, and unfortunately, I haven't seen a lot come from it, since it came out in 2013, around the time that epigenetics was really getting traction. And it's called Exploring Irish Multi-Generational Trauma and Its Healing: Lessons from the Oglala Lakota. And there's in those communities over there, many of them, and a lot of the friends I have in the Cherokee Nation and some others, they talk a lot about generational trauma and how it plagues. It makes everything very difficult. And I think when people think about trauma, they think about very violent, direct things like sexual assault, being beaten, stuff like that. But abuse is not just those very direct things. It's a lot of very small things that build up over time. So there's a great foundation called the Thunderbird Partner Foundation. They are a First Nations organization in Canada, and they have done some absolutely fantastic work, really tackling generational trauma and how it makes it very hard for the community to work together and how keeping their tribal identity together. And this was a quote from a documentary called Dakota 38+2, which was about the hanging that happened on December 26, 1862, that was ordered by Abraham Lincoln after a Dakota uprising. I'll read it out loud to you. Our people suffer from something. An elderly woman, a full-blood Lakota from Kokri, where I'm from. I was with her one time, and a lot of bad things were going on. I'd asked her, why does this always happen to us? Why do we always do this to each other? She didn't say anything for a while. We were driving, and when I looked over, she was crying. She said in our language, Ioka Shita, a deep, embedded genetic depression. Our people at one time had a very strong connection with Mother Earth, the Creator, nature, and all of it was taken away just like that. A lot of this depression stems from our loss of this connection with everything that we once had. A lot of our people are depressed, and we don't even know it. So this brings up a couple of things. One, a lot of symptoms of PTSD and generational PTSD are substance abuse, alcoholism, depression, bipolar disorder, most mood disorders, interpersonal issues, and inability to communicate effectively, there's a lot of downregulation of the emotional sections of our brains, which are like kind of right here, the temporal lobe. It shares the area with the amygdala, which is more inside of our brain. And we know from the science that when you have early experience and exposure to trauma, that it does make it much harder for you to emotionally regulate yourself when you communicate with others. Which brings me to epigenetics. The study of our behaviors and environments can cause changes that affect the way our genes work. Unlike genetic changes, epigenetic changes are reversible and do not change our DNA sequence, but they can change how our body reads a DNA sequence. I know everyone knows what a cell looks like, but just as a quick reminder, this is the human cell, and that's where all the DNA is in the nucleus. And this is where epigenetics is happening on the genes. The genes are like various piano players, and traumatic events, whether they're environmental, physical, emotional, can change where the piano player is playing on the DNA, which creates different kinds of music, or in this case, the way our body works and functions. As you see here from, this is from Teresa Brokey, Morgan Heiselman, and Jessica Gill. This is a diagram about the way the cycle of which were adverse childhood experiences, you have abuse, neglect, witnessing violence, racism, historical loss, associated symptoms, goes into epigenetic modifications, which are a bit detailed, but DNA methylation is a big part of it, plays a big role because it's like adding little bits and pieces of information on our DNA that then in turn changes the proteins that are being produced and changes the way our hormones work, and we go into survival mode. So you have health disparities, rate of psychiatric disorders goes up, PTSD, depression, anxiety, drug and alcohol dependence, rate of suicide goes up, rate of cardiovascular disease goes up, obesity, and life expectancy goes down. And we don't need, this is a very convoluted thing, but this is the feedback loop going on in our bodies, especially when we're part of a population that has gone through extensive historical loss, colonization. So imagine what happens when this keeps happening over and over again and nothing ever gets resolved. And just the collective historical loss and trauma is the collective experience of violence perpetrated against Indigenous people in the process of colonizing, resulting in an unresolved humanitarian crisis for Indigenous communities. So though our bodies are designed to deal with stress, the stress becomes chronic, our bodies are no longer able to keep up, and that's when problems happen. When I was at Western Carolina University, which is right next to the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Indians, I became very familiar with trends that happen. It's easier to get this data from reservations, although reservations are poor excuses for reparations for Indigenous Americans. That it's a high rate of alcoholism, substance abuse, unemployment, domestic violence. And, unfortunately, in racism, especially in terms of whiteness, they like to kind of be like, oh, well, that's just how they are. That's just what happens to them. And I've seen the stats. I've looked at the stats, and like they're loose pictures of what's going on, but I've seen the numbers of alcoholism, what's going on in the Western Isles and the Highlands. And, I know where I'm from, people don't like to talk about it. They like to be like, oh, that's just the individual. That's them having a lack of will. But the fact of the matter is that these are symptoms of PTSD, especially when it's transmitted through generations and things have not gotten better. And things getting better isn't just, progressing into and assimilating into capitalism and Westernism. Things getting better is having stewardship and agency of your land, of your language, your culture, and your people. And which brings me to how important it is, the connection with land, and how the language, yesterday, what was his name? I think it's Konyak. He was talking about, he was in Gaelic. He was talking about how, when he was growing up, everyone in the community worked in the language, and they worked the land in the language. Which brings me to this little guy right here. This is a natural killer cell. It's one of the many white blood cells we have. They're kind of like, well, they're they're badass warriors. They go after whatever invader is in our bodies immediately. They're one of the few white blood cells that has cytotoxic abilities to just kill on sight. Usually the other ones have to report it and be like, hey, I saw something, and then they got to call in the backup. So what's interesting is that when we spend time in native forests and environments, natural killer cells go up. They have the ability also to kill cancer, like, cancerous things happening in our body, which is very powerful. But imagine if you're constantly living in an ecological collapse, or even in urban areas, those numbers go down. And this work is, it's been building since 2008, and it's been mostly by a lot of Chinese scientists, where I'm from, a lot of people are like, oh, well, it's Chinese scientists working on, which is racist. Again, they just don't want to think about this stuff. It's complicated. But this is some really great science right here. I just wanted to put a few in because there's so many I didn't know what to pick from or pull from, but they're just talking about forest bathing. But I mean, think about when you're working with the land and working with the language at the same time. It's also your traditions. It's also art. It's all those things. And it's good for our immune system. And then it's good for our mental health. It actually goes through our immune system to boost mental health, because as we've learned, depression is not just a lack of serotonin at all. It's actually an issue of the 3 pounds of bacteria in our digestive tract being out of whack. And it's also caused by environmental factors. The big news that's been going on and where I'm over in the States has been that even though people have known it for a while, it's hard to ignore it at this point. But it's like, no, antidepressants don't help. They kind of it's kind of like a Band-Aid. Like, I take one, it helps me sleep, but it doesn't make my PTSD, my depression go away. So I've been spending a lot of time outside because I realized, as part of a diaspora, the last few years, I've spent a lot of time learning about the culture and language that was taken from my ancestors, which is why I even exist to begin with. My grandma and her brother came over to Raleigh, North Carolina to help the rest of their family chain migrate right before the Great Depression. And that's how I exist. So I've been learning the language because it's a connection. It's a way, the language sees me in a way that English will never see me. It also inspires my artwork. It's also been an important part of me healing, because I lost my father very tragically. He died in a very, Native American way from alcoholism and an overdose. And I can't talk about it where I'm from, because if people knew, they would think less of my father, and they loved him. The community loved him. And that's difficult, right? Because it's like as if he's a bad person suddenly, and no one is terrible for trying to cope with what's happening in their bodies, because we carry our stories not just verbally, we carry them in our bodies too. And it's originally thought of as more like spiritual hoo-ha. And maybe it is a little bit, but the science supports it now. I mean, we didn't need science to support it, but there we go. So the great news, again, is that epigenetics is reversible. It's not a permanent thing. It's just that, you have to have the ability to heal. And a lot of things have to be in place in order to heal. You need support from your community. You need the connection with land. You need your language and traditions, because that's the language of our bodies, our souls even, if I want to go there. So the Thunderbird Partner Foundation came up with the First Nations mental wellness continuum. And it is kind of complex to look at first, but you go from the outer part to the inner. So culture is foundation, and then the next level is key themes for mental wellness, then indigenous social determinants of health, partners in implementation, supporting elements, continuum of essential services, specific population needs. And you see here that language is on here. See language, elders, let's see. It's language. There we go, language, heritage, culture, but you see all these other things too: justice, social services, environmental stewardship, housing, healthcare. And the idea is that when you get to the outcomes are meaning, purpose, hope, belonging. And this includes everyone: adults, men and women, community workers, seniors, the LGBT, families and communities, remote areas. And it also talks about ways that you can, partners in implementing it. Now, I realize that I have opinions about abortion in Gaelic, and enough people are echoing them today, so I won't go into it. I don't think it is one size does not fit all. And I don't think that fighting them is really, I don't know, it's not gonna, I think it's important for the Gaelic community to have control over their own lives, over the money that they use to fund their own things. I read a report by Ian Campbell, and he talked a lot about how important it was for agency, and he did a pretty extensive survey, and it was very clear. Y'all want control over what happens. You don't want people in Scottish Parliament making decisions, and they're going to keep doing what they're going to do. But I want y'all to be able to do what you can do for yourselves. And obviously, I can't just be like, here you go, here's all the money, because I know it takes money to do this. But I know we can also figure it out. I just wanted to bring this to you today because generational trauma and looking through that lens in medicine has become a really important point as well, because, over where I'm from, Black women die at an alarming rate during childbirth over white women. And there's a lot of generational trauma in that story. And that's why there's actually a lot of Black midwives and doulas now who specialize in being present to help, and it decreases their chances of dying, which is fantastic. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that when we think about Gaelic revitalization and keeping it alive, it also means supporting members in your community who are struggling with addiction, with mental health issues, with alcoholism, talking about it with them. It's hard. I tried talking to my dad about it, and it was too late by then. But it doesn't have to be too late for a lot of people. And I know that stigmatizing them and isolating them, it hurts the community just as much as it hurts them. So what's also neat, apparently I have a blank slide there, fantastic. This is from the Thunderbird Partnership Foundation. They had a whole training outline for how they want to, they actually have taken time to work with people in the community to teach them about epigenetics, about generational trauma, and how it aligns with their own cultural stuff. So they want to look at Western science and their own indigenous science together to problem solve this stuff. And from everything I've seen myself working with children and adolescents in abusive backgrounds for the last 15 years, this is the approach that is so necessary. And I think that language without culture, without traditions, without the land, it doesn't exist by itself. I will say that when I was starting to learn Gaelic, it wasn't sticking, and it really discouraged me, even though I understand that it takes time because you're building neuronal trees in your brain to help support that knowledge. But when I learned more about the language, all the culture and memories encoded in it, and everything, it started sticking, and it surprised me. But I was like, it makes so much more sense because it's not just a language. It's not like English. It has an entire world, an invisible world connected to it that you get to see. And without that context, I don't know, it's hollow. So I hope this was helpful in some way. I welcome feedback and comments and questions, and I appreciate y'all having me here today, so thank you.